July 1946. District Department for the Registration of Irrecoverable Losses. The building is an old county office, its walls covered with fresh lime paint. On the second floor, behind a closed wooden door, the sound of footsteps echoes along the tiled corridor, followed by a dry metallic click of the latch. Inside, a desk stands under the harsh light of a green-shaded lamp. On it, a thick cardboard folder stamped in violet ink. Registry. Missing. Above it lies a typed form, model of 45, the paper faintly yellowed, a watermark barely visible when lifted to the light. Along the left edge, the paper is darkened, stored too long in a field archive. Every line on the form is filled: surname, given name, patronymic, year of birth, place of conscription, marital status. In the section Information on Death, there are only two machine-typed lines: missing in action and considered absent since April 1945. No report number, no witness statements, no mention of the unit. For the office, that is enough. For the family, it is nothing. Procedure is simple. Without an official mark, there is no payment, no relocation permit, no confirmation of loss. Without a mark, there is no passage. The clerk turns the register of outgoing correspondence to July, circles the date, writes the surname, and prepares the notification. The envelope will travel to a small settlement where the wife has been waiting in silence for over a year. Her mailbox is empty, but here that means nothing. The archive believes only the stamp. In the case file she is listed as spouse residing separately. That means she once came herself, carrying a certificate from the village council, asking to learn the fate of her husband. They told her then to wait for an answer from the front archive. The answer came. But in the lower margin, in blue pencil, there is a rare note: return not excluded. This phrase appears only when the front record carries a line like captured, further fate unknown, or when a soldier's trace ends near an area where, in 45, prisoner collection points operated. For the family, such a line sounds like hope. For the office, it sounds like a warning. If he reappears, all benefits must be withdrawn, all papers rewritten. The clerk wipes the seal, presses it firmly onto the document. A dry, heavy sound on the wooden desk. From that moment, the department considers the family notified. The paper leaves the room. The question remains: why did a man who vanished in April never reappear in the reports of his unit or the hospitals? Why was there no witness? Why did the field archive write captured, but the district record arrive stamped missing? And most of all, if the return is not excluded, then who exactly will come back under that name? October 1947. The fog that morning lay low over the settlement, not city fog, but heavy, from wet ground and river reeds, so that the road to the houses showed only in a pale strip. In that fog first heard were not words, but boots. Slow, not marching, not soldierly, but measured, like a man who knows the yard and the distance to the gate. She was inside, folding yesterday's newspaper, when the old latch on the door clicked from the draft. She thought it was the neighbor boy. When she opened, he was already standing by the gate. Field uniform. Belt tightened too high. On the breast, 2 awards, one clearly genuine, the other fixed a bit crooked. On the face, a long scar from the right temple down toward the jaw, the kind that does not appear in a hospital, but after rough handling, maybe in a camp, maybe on transport. He said her name calmly, as if he had said it yesterday, before the war. She did not cry out. She looked first not at him, but at his papers. Because in the kitchen, in a tin box, she kept the official notice from the district department. Missing in action, considered absent since April 1945. The state had said he was gone. Now a man stood at the door and said the opposite. He took out the folded paper. It was not the same paper the district sent. This one was thinner, with a light gray tone, probably from a different stock, post-war. The type was finer, the machine not the same as in their office. At the top it said, Certificate of Arrival from Captivity. Below, date, month October, year 1947. The stamp was violet but lighter than on local documents. Most importantly, the issuing body was not their district military commissariat, but a filtration point of the Ministry of Internal Affairs, located 2 regions away. That already meant the path had been unusual. Men who returned straight from the front or from official hospitals came with military papers. Men who passed through filtration came with internal affairs papers. And such papers always implied, the person is alive, but his past must be checked. He said he had been taken prisoner near the end, in East Prussia, that he had been moved west, then back, that the Americans gave him over, that they sat for months waiting for their names to be looked up, camp after camp. He spoke in a low voice, not looking straight at her, more as if recalling a story he had learned. She wanted to believe. A year and more of silence had hollowed her. She wanted to believe so much that she almost did not notice how his stories missed her older letters. He said he remembered the garden, and the chest under the bed, and the way the roof leaked in the spring. All that was true. But when he named the month when their boy was sick, he said March, and it had been May. Small discrepancy. The kind that can be put down to shock. The kind the viewer notices. She sat him at the table. Gave bread, the last potatoes. Poured tea from aluminum kettle. He ate like a man who had eaten in barracks, fast at first, then slower, pushing crumbs together with the fingers, not to lose. That part was convincing. He put the cap on the peg, looked at the wall where his pre-war photograph had once hung. It was not there anymore. She had taken it down after the notice. He said only, "You kept it neat." Then he looked around the room like a stranger measuring the space. At night, when he slept on the bench under a quilt, she unrolled his certificate again. The signature at the bottom was smeared, either because the ink was old or because he had folded the paper before it dried. The stamp itself belonged to a department that did not usually issue documents directly to citizens. The line "Identity Established" was marked with a dash, and in the corner, in blue pencil, stood the same phrase as in last year's notification: "Return not excluded." Only now it was crossed. That meant somewhere his name had already appeared in a list of missing, and now the list had to be corrected. The district did not like corrections. Next day, she went to the office. The clerk, a tired woman with pince-nez, opened the registry of losses, found his surname, ran a ruler along the line, and put a single bar through it, not blacking it out, not deleting, crossing. Beside it she wrote, "Returned from captivity. Verification pending." That last phrase separated him from those who fell at the front. The rule of that time was simple and cruel. Returned means alive, but not clean. Such men did not tell loudly that they had come back. Such wives did not boast in the street. In the evening, a neighbor dropped by with milk, looked at him, said that he had changed, that the war had eaten him. He answered with 2 short stories from the front. Both sounded correct. But both were about a unit that in April 1945 had been in a different sector than her husband's original regiment. She stared at him longer. On his left hand, there was a small burn scar she did not remember. On his right shoulder, the uniform bore a repair not made by her. And when she said the name of his frontline friend, the one who had come with him to the station in 41, he repeated it, but without the patronymic. Not a big mistake. One that can be forgiven. One that can also be a trace. The audience at this moment wants to believe with her. The form, the scar, the medals, all look like a homecoming from a hard road. But the documents do not match. The stamp is from the wrong office. The signature is blurred. The story is half learned. And between the certificate of arrival and the district registry, there is a gap of more than a year. A gap in which another person could have taken another person's name. The first doubts did not come from the wife. They came from paper. In late autumn of 1947, the district commandant's office conducted a routine check of residence registrations. It was a common post-war procedure. Too many people moved without permits. Too many demobilized soldiers settled with relatives. Too many former prisoners of war were trying not to appear in the lists at all. For such checks, there was one main source of truth: the house register. A thick, cloth-bound book kept either by the street elder or by the village council. Every person living in the house had to be written there with full name, year of birth, place of arrival, and the basis for residence. Without that entry, a person could be considered living illegally and could be summoned for clarification. In the register of her house, there were 3 names: hers, the son's, and the husband's, entered back in 41 before he left. Against his name in 45, the street elder had written in pencil, "To the front." After the notification arrived in 46, the same elder added, "Missing." That was in accordance with instruction. But when in October a man appeared and started living there again, no one added a proper line as required. Returned on basis of certificate. The wife did not insist. She knew. The fewer papers, the fewer questions. But the commandant's clerk was not her neighbor. She opened the book, saw that the man lived there, but there was no recent entry. She made a note on a separate sheet. Residing without current registration. On its own, it was not a crime. It only meant the man needed to appear in person with his documents. And that was where the second discrepancy surfaced. He did bring his certificate of repatriation. The violet stamp, the blurred signature, the date of October 1947. But the form the commandant's office expected for registration in the house book was of another series. Their form had a line for military unit of dispatch and a line for result of filtration. His did not. His only said, "Arrived from captivity, fit for labor." That formula was more typical for people directed to factories or construction, not for return to previous residence. The commandant looked at it longer than usual. The man said he had been in the same house before the war, that the street elder could confirm. The elder did confirm. But in the district file, there was still the earlier notification that he was missing. 2 papers in one, and the same case contradicted each other. In such situations, the office did not argue. It wrote, "To verify through original military unit." and that meant sending an inquiry. And inquiries in those years took months. Meanwhile, people in the settlement were quicker than the archive. In small settlements, post-war returns were counted by memory. They knew who came from the front, who from hospitals, who from Germany, who from the East. They also knew who came through the organs. Whisper travels faster than a letter. 2 women at the well said quietly that he did not greet like before, that he spoke softer, that he forgot the nickname of the local policeman. One man in the barnyard said straight, "Not the same one came back." No one said it to his face. They said it in the presence of the street elder. And the elder, according to the practice of the time, wrote a short note and sent it to the commandant together with the house register for December. That note was not emotional. It said, "Residents express doubt as to identity." Such notes did not prove anything, but they stayed in the file. At the same time, in the district clerical office, another small inconsistency appeared. When he filled in an application for ration cards, he wrote his surname in a sharper, newer hand than in the pre-war documents. Before the war, his letters were round, from village school, with long tails on the letters for Y and G. Now his handwriting was shorter and tighter, more like those who had written a lot of statements in camps or on transports. The clerk compared the hands, not a match. She did not accuse him. She did what documents require. She wrote on the margin, "Hand differs from earlier sample." In the same week, he filed a request to be re-employed at the workshop where he had worked as a turner before the war. The factory still had his pre-war personal card. In it, the signature was long and careless, a young man's. On the new application, the signature was shorter, almost cautious. The factory sent the card to the district to be attached. 2 samples in 1 month, and neither identical. In the post-war bureaucracy, that was enough to move the file from the passive shelf to the active desk. And there was one more layer of discrepancy: the term. When he spoke with the neighbors, he said he had been held 2 years. When he spoke with the commandant, he said 1 year and some months. When he spoke with his wife, he said, since 45. But the certificate he carried was issued in October 47, and the capture on the military side was listed as April 45. That made 2.5 years. In the official ideology of those years, such a long stay raised questions. Behind the desk, the officer closed the house register, put the street elder's note on top, and said the phrase that belonged to that era. The term is not discussed, meaning a man cannot choose how long he was in captivity. Either he was repatriated with his unit in 45, or he was delayed for reasons. Reasons had to be documented. They were not. So the case could not be left in silence. From that day, the man who had returned was no longer just a husband who came home. He was a resident whose registration did not match his papers, a worker whose signature did not match pre-war samples, a former prisoner whose term did not match his story, and a neighbor about whom people said in low voices, "The wrong one came back." The file was no longer a village matter once the filtration papers arrived. Early winter of 1947, the district received a pouch from the regional archives with materials on former prisoners of war who had been released through internal affairs camps. Inside, among other cases, lay an individual questionnaire, standard post-war form, gray paper, corners worn. At the top, in black ink, the title, "Questionnaire of a Repatriated Serviceman." Beneath it, in careful handwriting, the surname and given name of the man who had returned to the settlement. The same name that in the district book still had a crossed line, missing in action. This questionnaire was the key document that the wife had never seen. The audience now sees it. The Filtration Commission worked to a fixed algorithm. Every repatriated man was to name his unit, rank, time, and circumstances of capture, locations of stay, names of witnesses, names of camp commandants if known, and had to confirm whether he had any contact with enemy agencies. Each line was compared with military records. Where the lines did not match, a small note was made in the margins. In this questionnaire, the first part looked correct. Place of birth matched. Year of conscription matched. Even the description of parents matched the village records. But in the middle of the form, there was a turn. In the line, unit at the moment of capture, he wrote a rifle regiment number that, according to the earlier military card, he had left a year before his disappearance. In the line front, he wrote 3rd Belarusian, while his original draft papers indicated a different front. It could have been a memory lapse after camp life. But the commission did not work with assumptions. It worked with concordance. On the last page, attached with a rusty paper clip, was a small portrait photograph taken in the filtration point. Harsh light, shaved head, eyes narrowed from the flash. The man in the photograph looked like the one who had come home. Same scar on the right side, same long nose, same narrow lips. But the commission did not compare with the present man. It compared with the army service card that had been preserved from pre-war and from the time of mobilization. On that earlier card there was also a photograph, taken in summer, in a village studio, in a tunic too big for the young man. The face there was rounder, the ears stuck out slightly more, the chin was softer. Time and captivity can change a face. Weight, scars, age. But one thing usually does not change so quickly: the line of the eyebrows and the distance between the eyes. On the old card, the eyes were set a little wider. On the new photo, noticeably closer. The filtration officer, likely a captain, made a small service remark in the left margin with a blue pencil. Photo does not fully correspond, to be checked. That was not yet an accusation. That was a signal. Another mismatch was in clothing. On the photograph from the filtration point, he wore a gymnastiorka with attached shoulder boards. On the pre-war card, he had a uniform with no boards, which was normal for that time. The officer underlined the word gymnastiorka in the description and wrote the phrase that defined that chapter. To each his own uniform. Meaning, every serviceman has a documented path of issuance and replacement of clothing. If a man claims to have been in a given unit at a given time, his uniform must match the supply records of that unit. Here, the clothing seemed more like issued at the filtration camp than preserved from wartime service. On the reverse side of the questionnaire, there was a field for persons who can confirm identity. He named 2. One from his pre-war village, one from his supposed wartime unit. The first could be verified locally. The second could not, because the unit had been disbanded and mixed with others in 45. That gap forced the commission to escalate. At the bottom of the sheet, in a cramped, fast handwriting, appeared the line that moves the story from local doubt to state doubt. Check through the 3rd Directorate. The 3rd Directorate in those years handled counterintelligence and verification of persons who had been in captivity in occupied territories or under foreign command. A case that went there did not disappear. It slowed down, but it did not go away. For the viewer, this is the moment when the private story of a wife and her returned husband becomes a matter of a larger system. Now it is not the neighbors who whisper that the wrong man came back. Now it is a structure that lives by files, stamps, and comparisons, and it has seen thousands of such questionnaires. The commission also noted the dates. He said in the questionnaire that he had been captured in April of 1945. The front archive, in the earlier notification, had written only missing since April. The filtration camp had registered him only in September of 1947. That left more than 2 years unaccounted for. 2 years in which his appearance could have changed, his documents could have been lost or replaced, his story could have been borrowed. 2 years in which another soldier could have died, leaving behind a name and a file. The officer underlined the gap and wrote on the side, "Term of captivity exceeds average." Then another short, cold phrase, "Term is not justified." In the logic of that apparatus, a term that is not justified is a term that must be explained by someone else. And so the questionnaire, together with a copy of the old service card and the village house register note about residents doubt identity, was clipped together and sent upward. From now on, the man in the settlement was not just returned from captivity. He was subject to additional verification. His right to live where he lived, to work where he asked to be employed, to receive ration cards for a family, all of that now depended not on the word of his wife, not on the kindness of neighbors, but on whether in some office a major or lieutenant colonel of the 3rd Directorate would find in a box of captured German lists, or in a Soviet permanent loss register a matching name, a matching date, a matching face. And until that match appeared, his file would carry that penciled line, merciless in its simplicity, "To be checked." The letters appeared when no one was looking for them. Early spring of 1948, the district postal archive was being cleared out. Wartime sacks, unclaimed correspondence, redirected field mail. Most of it was routine. But in one canvas bag, tied with a frayed cord and marked "Hospital Correspondence, to be returned to sender," the clerk found a bundle of envelopes addressed to the same woman in the settlement who a year and a half earlier had been notified that her husband was missing, and half a year later had received him alive. The envelopes had never reached her. Each carried her name, her street, her village council. Each bore dates from late 45 and early 46, exactly that period when, according to the notification, he was considered absent. The clerk, trained to match mail with living recipients, took the bundle aside. By regulation, such letters were either destroyed or returned to origin. But the origin here was no longer valid. The sender was supposedly a patient of a military hospital that by 48 did not exist. So she did the next procedural thing. She attached a note and sent the bundle to the district office that already had a file on this family. That was how the letters entered the case. When the officer opened the packet, he did it with a metal paper knife, sliding it under the old red wax. The dry, brittle sound of broken sealing wax filled the room for a second, the same sound that in this story marks every new turn. The envelopes were not army-issued triangle letters. They were civilian-style, light brown, with a simple glue strip. On the front, in blue ink, a careful address. To wife, such and such surname, such and such settlement. In the corner, the sender. Evacuated hospital. No number of unit, no number of field post. That already did not match army practice at the end of the war. Inside, on folded sheets, there were short texts, all of them written in a neat, even hand. All of them in Russian, without dialect words, without the characteristic village turns that the real husband had used in pre-war documents. They all started in the same way. My dear, do not worry. I am alive. I am in treatment. I will return when they release me. Then followed a few domestic lines, clearly meant to reassure. How is our son? Is the stove fixed? Do not give the cow to anyone. Then always one phrase about papers. Do not believe everything that is written to you from the office. That was the phrase that made the officer read the letters twice. Because in 1945, a simple demobilized soldier would not write, "Do not believe the office." He would write, "I will come and explain." The handwriting itself was the main tell. Before the war, when the husband filled in his conscription card, his hand was wide, rounded, with broad spacing, letters leaning slightly to the right. In the application for ration cards that he had submitted after his return, the handwriting was tighter, a little nervous, but still recognizably masculine, with heavy pressure on downstrokes. In these letters, however, the script was slender, almost schoolteacherly, with very regular ovals, with identical loops on D and L, with a light pressure that left almost no embossing on the reverse side. It looked like the hand of a person who had written many similar letters for others. The officer compared one of the letters with the actual signature of the returned man that was in the house register file. Mismatch on 3 elements at once. G formed differently, T crossed higher, and the spacing between words far more even. At the bottom of one letter there was even a flourish. The real man never used flourishes. The paper gave away even more. It was not ordinary Soviet writing paper from a rural shop. Along the edge, when held to the light, there was a watermark in German, the kind used in Red Cross and repatriation camps for prisoner correspondence. That meant the letters were written not from a Soviet hospital, but from a place where former prisoners were kept before filtration. Yet in the text, there was not a single mention of captivity. Only the generic, "I am in treatment." That contradiction was too precise to ignore. Someone did not want the wife to know that he was in a POW camp. Someone wanted her to wait and not to trust any death notice. The archive officer wrote in the margin in pencil, firmly, the aphorism of this chapter. Handwriting does not lie. He underlined it, then added below, letters likely written by another person, possibly camp clerk. That was the procedural, unemotional conclusion. For the viewer, this was the material turn, the evidence you can feel with your hands. Not memories, not neighbors' whispers, but paper, ink, watermark, foreign stock. The letters also proved something else. They showed that in late 45, someone, somewhere, already knew that under this surname there was a living man, and yet in July 46, the district still sent to the wife an official "missing in action." 2 parallel channels of information existed, the slow, rigid, military bureaucratic one and the informal, prisoner camp one. In the latter, the man was alive. In the former, he was dead. That gap is what makes this story a case, not a family drama. When confronted with the letters, the wife at first said she never received them. That was the truth. The postal archive had failed to deliver. Then she said the style was not his. Also the truth. He had always written shorter, more clumsily. Then the officer showed one line to the returned man. He read it, paused, and said that in camp they sometimes asked a literate man to write for them, that he had dictated. That could have been. Many did. But then the officer pointed to the German watermark and to the phrase, "Do not believe everything that is written to you from the office," and asked, "Who exactly told you to write that?" The man could not name. He said, "One of ours." The officer wrote another short note in the file. Origin of letters unclear, to be clarified during questioning. The presence of these letters solved one part of the puzzle. It explained why the wife had not remarried, and why she had been ready to accept a man with missing years and wrong papers. Someone had been feeding her hope from the other side of the wire. But the letters created a much bigger problem for the system. They showed that the man's story had been prepared in advance. That even before repatriation, he had an imagined hospital, an invented illness, and a prescribed line about distrust of official notices. That is why the file, after the sound of the knife cutting the wax, after the dry turning of the pages, went not back to storage, but further along the chain, to those who checked not only persons, but also channels. The interrogation took place in May of 1948. The room was small, window-covered with heavy blinds, a single desk lamp throwing a pale circle of light on the wooden surface. Across that circle lay a thick file marked Protocol Number 17. The name on the cover matched the man who had returned home 18 months earlier. The officer conducting the questioning had read the case before the session. He knew about the mismatched signatures, the uncertain photo, the letters written in another hand. He spoke quietly, without anger, as the procedure required. "State your surname, given name, and patronymic." The man did. The same voice, low, cautious, with a pause before the middle name, as if choosing it. "Place and year of birth." He answered again, "Correct." "Date of capture." Silence for a moment, then April of 45. "Place." Another pause, longer. "Near Königsberg." The officer wrote it down. The typewriter clicked unevenly, one key sticking slightly on the G. "At that time you were serving in which regiment?" The man hesitated. "The Rifle Regiment, number..." He stopped, trying to remember. The officer looked at the previous page. "You said 364 at the filtration." The man nodded slowly. "Yes, 364. The officer pressed. "In this district, there is no record of a man of your surname in that regiment after February 45. The man said, "We were transferred." "To where?" "I do not recall exactly. It was confusion." The officer leaned back. The procedure was not about catching contradictions through tone. It was about alignment with documents. He opened the file to the photocopy of a field card. "Here it says you were in 332, not 364. The man looked down, nodded again. "Perhaps yes, that is possible." Every such "perhaps" was recorded. The stenographer, a young woman in a gray jacket, tapped out each word, marking pauses with dashes, adding small corrections when he repeated himself. "Who can confirm your identity?" "My wife." "Anyone from your unit?" "No one survived." "How did you cross back into Soviet territory?" "Through Poland." "When?" "In the autumn." "Which autumn?" 46. "You were captured in 45 and returned in 46. "Yes. But the certificate of repatriation is dated October 47. He did not answer. The officer repeated the question slowly. The man said then, "There was delay in paperwork." The officer wrote that phrase himself, by hand, Beside the typed line, delay in paperwork. That was the way contradictions were frozen in text. The aphorism of the chapter belongs to this moment. A word without a signature does not exist. Every word he spoke became real only when typed, reviewed, and signed. And each correction, each dash, each word that did not align with an earlier page required either an explanation or a silence. During captivity, did you perform any labor? Yes. What kind? Repair work. For whom? The Red Cross. The officer looked up. Where? In Germany. Which town? He could not name. The stenographer stopped for a second, waiting for a word. None came. She wrote a long dash. The officer continued. Did you sign any papers during your captivity? The man said, No. The officer opened a document inside the folder, a copy of one of the letters with the German watermark. He placed it on the table. Is this your handwriting? The man leaned closer, squinting. No, someone helped me write. Who? A fellow prisoner. Name? He shook his head. I don't remember. The officer asked again, So you confirm you did not write this? I dictated. In what language? In Russian. The officer pointed at a line in the letter written in German cursive, a postal instruction, and said, You understand this? No. Then how did you know it would be sent? We were told. The stenographer typed, Does not know name of scribe, claims dictation. The officer turned another page. Where were you between May 45 and September 47? The answer came after a long pause. In camp. Where? I do not remember the name. There were numbers. How many camps? 2. Locations. East Germany. The officer looked down at the record. The previous statement had said, Poland. He said nothing. He wrote, Contradiction with statement of line 7. That is how inconsistencies built a case. Not through emotion, but through cross-reference. Every difference became a small ink mark on the paper, each mark pulling the man further from the version he was trying to defend. After 2 hours, the questions ended. The officer placed the typed pages in front of him. Read and sign. The man took the fountain pen, hesitated. The paper trembled in his hand. His name, the same that had been written on death notices, ration applications, house registers, now appeared once more, this time in the record of questioning. But his handwriting had changed again, the letters smaller, squeezed into the lines, the V curved differently. The officer noticed, wrote on the margin, Signature differs from previous. The man put down the pen. The officer stamped the last page. The sound of rubber meeting paper echoed briefly in the closed room. The procedure was complete. The document now existed. Whatever he had said, confused, fragmented, contradictory, was now part of a numbered protocol. Later readers would not hear his pauses or his silences. They would see only clean typed rows, some words underlined, some corrected in blue pencil. At the bottom, 2 signatures, one of the officer, one hesitant, of the man. Between them the system drew its line. Truth was not what a person remembered, but what was signed and sealed. The confession came not as an outburst, but as a correction. It was written on a single typed page, thin gray paper, the edges slightly curled from the heat of the desk lamp. The heading read, Supplement to Protocol Number 17. Beneath it, 2 columns, Statement of the subject and Remarks of the officer. At the top, the date, June 19, 1948, the same day as the last interrogation. The stenographer had already left. Only the officer remained, sitting opposite the man, dictating slowly, one phrase at a time. The tone was quiet. Routine. The sound of the typewriter marked each step, a dry mechanical pulse that replaced any emotion. The text began with the formal phrase used in all such documents. I, the undersigned, hereby confirm. And then, line by line, the story unfolded, not shouted, not argued, simply recorded. He stated that he had taken another man's name. The officer did not react. He asked, "When exactly did you do this?" The answer came after a pause. "In April of 45, during retreat near Königsberg." The typewriter repeated it in its dry rhythm. The man continued. He said there were 3 of them, 1 wounded, 1 dead, and himself. Papers scattered in the mud. He picked up the wallet of the fallen, whose face was disfigured. "Why?" asked the officer. The man said, "Because mine were gone. Without papers, no one is anyone. With papers, you live." The officer said, "You understood that the name belonged to a soldier considered missing?" "I did." "And you used that name to pass through filtration?" "Yes." "And you knew the real one died?" "I did." The officer leaned over the typewriter, added in his own hand between lines. Confirmed knowingly. The rest was procedural. "Where did this occur?" "Southwest of Königsberg." "Was there witness?" "No." "What happened to your own documents?" "Lost during shelling." "What was your true name?" He said it, another surname, similar in sound, same first name, same patronymic initial. The officer wrote it carefully on a blank line, then underlined both names in red pencil, drawing an arrow from one to the other. It looked like a transfer in an account book. One life moved into another. The confession explained everything that the documents could not. The mismatched signature, the altered handwriting, the wrong regiment, the different capture date, even the letters. The man had not written from a hospital. Someone else had. The one who died under Königsberg. The officer asked again, "Where did you learn details of his family?" The man said, "From his letters. He carried one from his wife. I kept it, so I could answer if questioned." "Did you intend to deceive the family?" "No. I thought she would never know." He looked down when he said it. Not guilt. Calculation. For 2 years he had lived that life, slept in that house, worn that name on his ration cards, signed it on the register. When the officer asked, "Do you regret?" he said, "I am tired." That was all. The officer stopped the typewriter, reread the page aloud, each sentence short, declarative, no adjectives. The man listened, then said he agreed. The officer pushed the paper forward. "Sign." The man took the pen and wrote his assumed name, the one that had belonged to another. His hand trembled slightly, but he did not hesitate. The officer watched, then said, "Now sign with your true name." The man looked at the page, lowered the pen again, and wrote it, slower, less steady, the first time that name had appeared on any Soviet document since 1945. 2 names, one above the other, one real, one borrowed. The line between them thin as breath. The officer drew a single diagonal slash across the page, standard mark meaning admission recorded. Then he took the rubber stamp, pressed it into the pad, and brought it down with a dry, heavy sound. Принято. Accepted. The word that in this system replaced any verdict of conscience. Outside, the corridor was silent. The lamp buzzed faintly. The officer placed the page into the folder, clipped it to the previous protocols, and tied the folder with a string. Procedure complete. In the record of the 3rd Directorate, the case now carried a new label. Identity established. Substitution confirmed. No tears, no dramatization. Just a number, a date, a conclusion. For the viewer, this is the point where tone shifts, but emotion does not. The narrator's voice remains level, but the meaning darkens. We learn that the man who returned was not who he claimed. The real soldier, the husband, the son, the name on the missing notice, had died near Königsberg. The one who stood in his place had worn another's history like a uniform. In the archive, such things are written not as tragedy, but as correction. Case rectified. At the bottom of the page, in the officer's narrow script, a final note. To be forwarded to tribunal for decision. Then another stamp, quieter this time, the ink fading. Filed. The sound of the stamp echoes like a full stop. The machine of verification closes another file. The truth has been found, not by conscience, not by confession in tears, but by the steady rhythm of typewriter keys and the weight of a seal. Refusal equals confession. That was the rule. And in the end, he did not refuse. The tribunal met in September of 1948 in a requisitioned classroom of the district school. On the door, a simple sign typed in purple carbon copy, "Hearing closed to the public." The file lay on the table before the presiding officer, thick, tied with a gray cord, its spine marked Case No. 321. It contained every document from the past 2 years, the House Register note, the mismatched signatures, the interrogation protocols, the confession. The title page carried both names now, one crossed out, one underlined in red. The tribunal was composed of 3 officers, a colonel, a major, and a captain as secretary. The accused sat on a wooden chair to the side, hands on his knees, head lowered. He wore the same faded uniform in which he had come home, the same 2 medals on his chest. The only difference was the patch on his sleeve, a small rectangle with his case number, not his name. The procedure was brief. The colonel read from the indictment. Each line was precise, impersonal. For having assumed the identity of a deceased serviceman, for having used said identity to obtain material benefits and to conceal his own status as a prisoner of war, the accused is hereby charged under Article 58, 1b of the Criminal Code. The words material benefits meant a ration book and housing. The words conceal his own status meant survival. No one discussed motives, only the form. The aphorism of this chapter, "The verdict is not discussed," was written into the very rhythm of the hearing. The officer from the 3rd Directorate, acting as witness, confirmed that verification through German and Soviet lists had identified the real soldier killed in April of '45 near Königsberg. A field burial certificate bore his original name and a regiment number that matched the documents. The body had been found in a trench, unrecognizable except for the tag. That was enough. The man sitting in the chair had admitted taking the papers. In the tribunal's logic, the rest was procedure. The colonel read the confession aloud. The sound of the pages turning was louder than the words themselves. The accused did not look up. The major asked one question, as required. "Do you confirm what is written?" He answered quietly, "Yes." "Do you wish to add anything?" "No." The colonel nodded. "Then we proceed." The secretary began to type the judgment on the portable typewriter. Each keystroke echoed against the bare walls. The text followed the standard template. Having examined the materials of case number 321, and having heard the accused, the tribunal finds him guilty. There was no defense counsel, no witnesses called. The file itself was the witness. The law required that at least one mitigating circumstance be considered. The colonel mentioned that the accused had performed no hostile acts and had returned voluntarily. The major added that he had confessed without coercion. The captain noted, "Nevertheless, identity fraud of a serviceman killed in action is a grave offense against state trust." The colonel looked at the clock, then said, "The tribunal retires to deliberate." They moved to the adjoining room for 10 minutes. The accused remained seated, motionless, staring at the ink stain on the desk in front of him. Outside, through the wall, came the faint sound of school children reciting the alphabet in another classroom. The tribunal returned. The colonel read the decision standing. The tribunal, guided by the articles of the Criminal Code, sentences the accused to 10 years of corrective labor without deprivation of rights upon completion. The phrase was delivered flatly, without emphasis. 10 years was neither the harshest nor the lightest sentence. It was the average for substitution cases. No one reacted. The major signed first, then the captain, then the colonel. The secretary placed the page before the accused. "Sign that you have been informed." He took the pen and signed with his true name, not the borrowed one. The first and last time he would do so in that building. After he signed, the colonel said, "The verdict is final. No appeal, no discussion." The meaning of the aphorism became literal. The verdict is not discussed. The guard entered, gestured toward the door. The chair scraped on the wooden floor, the only sound in the room besides the faint whir of the typewriter cooling down. The accused stood, adjusted his jacket, looked once at the window, but could see nothing through the drawn blinds. The secretary collected the pages, stamped each with the tribunal seal, the ink heavy and dark. The colonel added the final line to the record. "Case concluded. File to be archived." Then came the sound that has followed this story from the first chapter, the dry, resonant thud of the rubber stamp against paper. Pregnato. Accepted. The same sound that had closed the confession, the same sound that had begun with the missing notice. A rhythm of bureaucracy replacing human breath. When the guards let him out, the corridor smelled of ink and dust. The file remained on the desk, tied again with its cord. In that moment, the viewer sees what remains. One folder, one stamp, one number. A life reduced to a procedure. Outside, evening light struck the wall of the school. Inside, silence. Only the echo of a chair moving back into place. A last sound in the room where judgment had been spoken. The case reached the archive in December of 1948. The transfer slip, typed in triplicate, bore the phrase used for all closed tribunal materials. "To be stored indefinitely in the Special Department, Section Identity Clarifications." A driver carried a wooden crate of folders from the tribunal to the District Administrative Archive, a basement room beneath the former tax office, its windows sealed, its air smelling of dust and damp cardboard. The clerk receiving the shipment wore gloves. Each folder was inspected for seals and signatures before shelving. Case number 321 was in the middle of the stack. The string binding it was new, waxed, tied in a cross. The cover bore 2 names, one in black ink, one crossed in red. Beneath it the note, "Identity substitution confirmed." There was no ceremony in its arrival. The clerk checked the inventory, found the proper shelf, and slid it into place between 2 other volumes labeled "Unverified Returns" and "Filtration Pending." The shelves themselves were old, iron, painted gray, their surfaces layered with the fine white dust that paper makes when it ages. The folders were arranged not by sentiment, but by code. Each spine carried a number, a short title, and one of 3 markings: confirmed, unconfirmed, deceased. The folder that now contained the story of one man's borrowed life received the middle label, unconfirmed. Under the rules of the special department, such files were not to be reopened except by written order. They were considered resolved in fact, but not in consequence. The archive's task was to preserve, not to interpret. The aphorism of this chapter hung like invisible text above every shelf. The archive keeps, it does not judge. Once a folder was placed, its contents ceased to belong to the living. They existed only as references, footnotes in other reports, evidence in statistical summaries. Inside the folder, the order of documents was fixed by thread. On top lay the tribunal verdict. Below it, the confession. Then the protocols, the letters, the filtration questionnaire, the village register copy, the notification of missing, and finally the first page from July 1946, now yellowing at the edges, its stamp faded but still legible. The chain of paper formed a perfect circle. The man declared missing, the man returned, the man erased. The sound in that room was the sound of drawers closing, of metal sliding against metal, of record books being stamped. The word filed was repeated in monotone. In that dim basement the clerk spoke little. Each movement was procedural. A folder was taken, an entry made in the ledger, a date written, a seal pressed. The only illumination came from 2 desk lamps with green shades, their cones of light fixed on narrow tables where documents were sorted and numbered. Under that cold light, the files looked like stones, inert, their contents already beyond life and guilt. At the end of the day, the clerk who handled case number 321 wrote a short note in the ledger. 1 volume, verified, placed in section 3, shelf 4. Then he blotted the ink, closed the book, and turned off his lamp. The faint ticking of the clock and the distant hum of the ventilation remained. When the door shut, the light under it thinned and vanished. Silence took the room. Years would pass before anyone touched that folder again. Dust would thicken over the labels. The red pencil marks would fade to brown. The shelf itself would bow slightly under the weight of thousands of similar cases. Men who had returned under other names, soldiers who had stepped back into lives that were not theirs, wives who waited for letters written by someone else's hand. Each of them now reduced to paper, each file marked unconfirmed. For the viewer, the camera lingers. A close shot of the spine, the hand-lettered number 321, a smudge of red, a faint watermark of time. The voice of the narrator remains level. No conclusion, no redemption. Only the quiet order of record-keeping. In that order there is a kind of final logic. The tribunal judged, the law sentenced, but the archive endured. It neither forgave nor condemned. It kept. In the end, history in such rooms is not written by those who lived, but by those who catalogued. The folder stays where it was placed, between returned, unverified, and pending confirmation. Cold light over dust, paper instead of pulse. The echo of one last stamp in the silence. Accepted. Filed. Preserved. It was many years later, long after the sentence had been served and the district archive had moved to a new building, that the sun came. It was already another country in tone, but the same country in paper. He was a grown man then, with his own family, holding in his hand a folded certificate that named him as child of a serviceman who had not returned from the front. He came to the Rehabilitation Bureau to clarify the fate of his father, as so many did in those years. The clerk behind the glass asked for the surname. He gave it. She asked for the year of birth. He gave it. She asked, "Under which article was he sentenced?" He said he did not know, only that his father had been taken after the war for something connected with documents. She turned to the register of rehabilitated and began to search, page by page, the neat columns of names wiped clean by decrees. The name of the real father, the one who had died under Königsberg in April 1945, was not there because the state had never registered him as sentenced. The name of the man who had lived in their house and gone to tribunal under Article 58 was also not there, because identity substitution was not among those articles that were publicly forgiven. Two fates, both incomplete, both missing from the list that could close a family story. The clerk looked up and said the cold phrase of that office, "There is no match." Then, to be correct, she added, "There are two similar entries, but neither corresponds fully to your data." The son asked, "So which one was my father?" The clerk, not unkindly, said, "According to our records, none." He did not argue. He knew that in the story his mother had told him there had always been a gap, that a man had come back and then had been taken away again, that his mother had said the papers were wrong, that she had once shown him an old death notification, and later a repatriation certificate with another stamp. Now the Bureau gave him a third version: no valid entry, no rehabilitation, no closure. He asked if there was an archive. The clerk wrote him an address on a small slip. He went. The local Museum of Military Glory kept a wall of photographs of fallen and missing from the district. Black and white portraits, most of them taken before the war, men in tunics, in suits, sometimes even in civilian shirts. Under each, a faint caption with name, year, and unit. On that wall, in the lower row, hung a photograph that looked like his father. Not the man who had lived with them. The younger one, rounder in the face, with ears a little wider, the man from the pre-war service card. The caption under the photo was pale, the ink washed by time. K.I.S. Missing near Königsberg, April 45. That was the real soldier. The son stood before the photo for a long time, trying to match the features to his own. He found only fragments. The eyes, maybe. The mouth? No. The hairline? No. And yet he felt drawn to this face more than to the one he remembered from childhood. The narrow, tired face of the man who had eaten at their table, who had fixed the roof, who had taught him to tie rope. It dawned on him then what the archivist had written long ago in red pencil, without knowing him. In this story, no one was whole. The museum guide, an old woman, said, "That one never came back, poor soul." He said nothing, because in his house someone had come back, but that someone now was in another file, in another archive, under another mark. He asked whether the museum had any additional information. She shook her head. "We only have what the Military Enlistment Office gave us." The Enlistment Office had long since purged its wartime anomalies. The returned but not verified, the captured but repatriated, the substituted identities. All of them had been sent to the special storages, not to the museum walls. What hung here was the version of the war that could be shown. What lay there, in the basement archives, was the version that could only be read. He left the museum and went to the regional archive. There, in a reading room lit by cold fluorescent tubes, he filled out a request slip. The archivist brought him a file, not his father's, but a general list of sentenced repatriates. He searched the pages. His borrowed father was there. Case number, article, sentence, 10 years. In the remarks column, released. Further fate not traced. No note of rehabilitation. No note of death. Just an end of line. He turned the page, hoping to find the real one, the fallen one. But that name did not appear. For the archive he had died correctly, as a soldier, in 45, and had not been subject to later review. 2 lines, 2 men, 1 family, no convergence. At the end of the day, the archivist asked if he needed an official reply. He said yes. She typed it on a machine, formulaic text. In response to your inquiry regarding Citizen K, the archive reports, in the files of rehabilitated persons, no complete correspondence has been established. Additional verification requires reference to central repositories. She put the sheet on a board, stamped it with the archive seal. The sound of the stamp was the same as in 1946, 1948, the same as in the tribunal room. A sound that closed documents, not wounds. She handed him the paper. He folded it, put it in his pocket. His steps in the corridor were the last sound. For the narrator, there is only one conclusion, and it is not consoling. In this story, no identity was restored. The man who died has a photograph but no grave in that village. The man who lived has a sentence but no name on the wall. The woman who waited received letters written by another hand. The son who searched found 2 tracks, and neither of them led to a living father. The final aphorism holds. None of them is the real one. The camera, if there is one, returns to the museum wall. Faces in rows. Dust on frames. A weak winter light from the window. 1 photograph slightly crooked. The caption below it half faded. And over all of it, silence. Not the dramatic silence of revelation, but the bureaucratic settled silence of papers that will not be revised. The echo of a stamp. Steps receding down a long corridor. Then nothing.